Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good. We'll recite the opening verse one more time. Listen and repeat. From next week, we'll recite this together. Chaitanyam sarvagam sarvam, Chaitanyam sarvagam sarvam, sarvabhuta guhashayam, sarvabhuta guhashayam, yat sarva vishayatitam, yat sarva vishayatitam, tasmai sarva vide namaha. Tasmai sarva vide namaha. Good. And for our online viewers, I apologize for not putting this slide up. We continue with our study of Shankara's Upadesha Sahasri. Before we pick up the thread today, there was a question that came by email with regard to Shankara's very bold statement, which is often put in terms, jnanam eva moksha. Moksha, liberation, is the result of jnanam eva, knowledge alone. And as we will pick, when we pick up the thread, we'll see knowledge and not karma, knowledge and nothing else. But the question is, in all of our other classes, we've discussed the importance of karma yoga, the importance of meditation, the importance of bhakti, all of which is absolutely true. Notice that's not our topic right here. So we have to be very careful. When we're studying, you have to keep the entire body of teachings in mind when you're studying a particular topic. We can't have this tunnel vision and only look at what Shankara is teaching here. We'll come to Shankara's point in just a few moments, but recall we've discussed at great length, we've said that in order to gain this extraordinary knowledge, you require an extraordinary degree of preparation. You've heard me say that before. And in order to get that extraordinary degree of preparation, karma yoga is absolutely necessary. Meditation is necessary. Bhakti is necessary. All of the various sadhanas, practices that we do, all of that is necessary. Then why is Shankara saying jnanam eva moksha? He means that all of it is necessary, but it is knowledge that destroys the ignorance that causes suffering. That's his point. Knowledge destroys the ignorance that causes suffering. Karma yoga doesn't destroy ignorance. Karma yoga makes you ready for the knowledge that destroys ignorance. Bhakti and meditation don't destroy ignorance, but they make you ready for the knowledge that does destroy ignorance. So, I have a silly way of describing this. You've all heard the metaphor of the rope snake. So to make the mistake of thinking that karma solves the problem of suffering is the equivalent of if you're in a dark alley and you see the snake, to beat the snake with a stick is the equivalent of trying to use karma to solve the problem of suffering. We said in our very first class, the problem of human suffering is due to ignorance in the form of self-non-recognition. When you fail to recognize your true self as being full and complete, that inner divinity, that self-non-recognition leads to a life of suffering. This knowledge removes that ignorance. So with regard to the snake, ignorance of the rope leads to suffering. You're frightened by the snake. The way to get rid of the snake is not by beating it with a stick, but by removing your ignorance of the rope. Now, the silly way of extending that metaphor is to say that suppose you see the snake and you are just running around in terror, and I'm trying to tell you it's not a snake, it's just a rope. But you are so upset, jumping up and down, screaming and crying, you can't even hear me tell you that it's just a snake, just a rope. So you get the point. Before you can hear me say it's just a rope, you need to get settled down. And that's a good metaphor to describe the role of karma yoga, of meditation, and bhakti. They help you get settled down, so to speak. They prepare you for this knowledge to take place. So don't misunderstand Shankara's teaching here. When he says, jnanam eva moksha, knowledge alone liberates, he does not mean bhakti is unnecessary, karma is unnecessary, karma yoga is unnecessary, or meditation is unnecessary. What he's saying is, just as knowledge destroys the rope snake, in the same way, knowledge destroys the ignorance, which is the root cause of suffering. We've discussed all that. Now, let's come back to today's topic. In our previous class, Shankara developed at great length a Purva Paksha, an opposing point of view. That opposing point of view is addressing. The basis for that opposing point of view is this. Knowledge only works when it's accompanied by karma. In particular, Vaidika karma, Vedic karma, meaning rituals. So this knowledge only works when it's accompanied by rituals. This is the position of the Purva Paksha. Let me go to the board and remind you of some of that. Okay. So, Purva Paksha, you remember, is the opposing point of view. In this case, the Purva Paksha, it has a complicated name, but maybe it's worth knowing it. We gave it before. It is a little complicated. Jnana, karma, samudchaya, vada. So this opposing point of view is a vada, it is a doctrine. It is a doctrine about the samudchaya, combination. Combination of what? Jnana, knowledge, and karma, action in general, rituals in particular. So this is a very common objection in his time and place. Remember, he lived at least 1,200 years ago when there was a tremendous amount of focus on ritualism, and Shankara was definitely going against the grain. You think of him as being a spiritual revolutionary of his time by going against the intense ritualism of his time and place. Anyway, he developed, and what we saw in the last class was a systematic development of this jnana karma samudchaya vada, this doctrine that you must combine karma with jnana in order to gain moksha. And he actually presented 3 different arguments. Yeah, I just want to get the Sanskrit terms. The first argument he presented was that karma is sahakari, it's an auxiliary. In other words, karma allows jnana to work, so that's the first of the 3 arguments he gave. We call that sahakari. Second argument This is just to review our last class, and we'll pick up the thread. That karma, the rituals are vihita, they're enjoined. The same Vedas that tell you can gain liberation through knowledge, those same Vedas tell you to do lots of rituals. So that's the second argument. And the third argument, pratyavaya, which is the sin of omission. This argument went such that if you fail to do your rituals and you are focused only on gaining this knowledge, then by failing to do required rituals, you will acquire sin called pratyavaya, sin of omission. So last point here, and I don't think I stressed this much in the last class. This development of Purva Paksha, the opposing point of view, this is commonly done in any argument. Politicians do this a lot. But usually when it's done in a fake way. What do I mean in a fake way? You've heard the term straw man argument? That's what I mean by fake way. What is straw man argument? You introduce an opposing point of view, but an opposing point of view that's very weak, an opposing point of view that's very, very ineffective, an opposing point of view that's like a straw man, easily defeated. And that's commonly done in arguing to bolster your point of view. You introduce this very weak version of the opponent's argument, and then you show how silly that argument is. That's a very common way of arguing, and it's a very weak form of argument. The point I'm making here is Shankara most clearly is not introducing a straw man argument here. Notice he spent a number of verses developing this Purva Paksha. So it's not a straw man argument, it's a fully developed opposing point of view. And only now that he has fully developed that opposing point of view, only now is he ready to defeat it, to reject it. And that's where we pick up today's class. And we start today with verse 12. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see. Vidyaya pratikulam hi, vidyaya pratikulam hi, karma syat sabhimanatah, karma syat sabhimanatah, nirvikaratma buddhischa, nirvikaratma buddhischa, vidyetiha prakirtita, vidyetiha prakirtita. So here comes Shankara's refutation of this jnana karma samuchaya. In the second line, he says karma syat, karma, action in general, and a performance of rituals to accompany gaining this knowledge. He says performing that karma or rituals, he says it is pratikulam in the first line. We've seen that word before. Incompatible. Karma syat pratikulam. Because karma syat, karma is, performance of rituals is, pratikulam, incompatible with what? Vidyayaha, with knowledge. The performance of any deed, in particular rituals, he says, it is incompatible with knowledge, this knowledge, atma-jnanam, atma-vidya, we can using this word. Why? And he gives a reason here. Sabhimanataha. Sa-abhimana. Abhimana here doesn't mean pride. It means identification. Sabhimana, sabhimanataha means because of identification. Now, we need to peel away the layers here. He's saying the performance of rituals, or karma in general, is incompatible with this knowledge because the performance of rituals is accompanied by identification with your body, identification with your mind, your senses, your faculties, etc. Because, and we need to see the second half of this verse to make it very clear, Atma doesn't do anything. Atma can't do anything. Atma just is. Atma just shines like light, just shines, illumining what is. In the same way, Atma, your true self, just shines as a light of consciousness, revealing whatever's happening in your mind. We'll see, which is what he says in the second half of the verse. We'll see that, and then there's a lot to be said here. So he says that last line, Vidya iti iha, iha here, in our current context, Vidya iti, what we mean by Vidya, knowledge, and what we mean by Vidya, knowledge, third line, what we mean by knowledge is nirvikara atma buddhi. Buddhi here means knowledge, understanding. Understanding of what? Atma. Atma buddhi, understanding about Atma. What kind of understanding about Atma? Atma being nirvikara, unchanging. Atma is unchanging consciousness. That is a crucially important adjective, nirvikara. And you may not have heard it before. You're hearing it now. You're going to hear it much more because it is central to the teachings of Vedanta. To summarize the verse before we go into more detail, Shankara is saying that the performance of rituals or any kind of action is completely incompatible with this knowledge, because this knowledge is not any kind of knowledge. It's knowledge of Atma which is nirvikara, unchanging. And here's the point, that which doesn't change can't do anything. In order to be an agent of action, in order to do a ritual, you have to do something. To do something requires change, as a minimum, change of the position of your hand, for example. That which is unchanging, unmoving, can't do anything. That which can't do anything obviously can't be involved in doing rituals or any kind of action. So let's explore this. Why is it that consciousness, the essence of who you are, cannot do anything? A common Sanskrit word we use here, karta, means doer of action, agent of action, karta. So we say here that Atma is a karta, not an agent of action. So let's explore this. How can we say that Atma is not an agent of action? And please remember, when we use the word Atma, we're not talking about some abstract philosophical idea. We're talking about you in your essential nature as a conscious being. Right now, you are the conscious being who's aware of whatever is happening right now. This is our starting point. So, when we want to inquire, is Atma an agent of action, karta? Let's start with the question, who decided to come here for class this evening? Who decided? And then the question now is, did Atma decide to come here for class? Now, if you've studied some Vedanta before, you know the answer to that question is not at all. Why? Decision-making takes place in your mind, and whatever your mind decides, those decisions are carried out by your body, etc. Decision-making process, if you think about decision-making process, means you evaluate different opportunities. You could stay home tonight and watch TV. How boring that would be. Anyway, so you evaluate options, you weigh the value of each of those options, and you choose the option that you think is most valuable. Clearly a mental process, okay? Whatever happens in your mind is known to you, the conscious being. You, as a conscious being, a conscious person, the awareful observer of whatever is happening in your mind, sakshi, we've used that word before. You, in your fundamental nature, are the sakshi, the awareful observer of whatever is happening in your mind. The decision-making process takes place in your mind. By the way, if you think back earlier tonight, did you make a decision to come here? Or was it an accident? No, you made a deliberate decision. I'm going to the ashram for class. You were aware of the decision-making process that took place in your mind. You get it? Which means you, in your essential nature as Atma, as Sakshi, as Chaitanya consciousness, you didn't decide, but rather you are the conscious being that revealed the decision-making process that takes place in your mind. You didn't do anything. You did not decide to come here. Atma is not an agent of action. Atma is incapable of action. My guru once commented sarcastically, Atma is good for nothing. In the sense that Atma can't do anything. And of course, a very American attitude. What does it do? What good is it? Good for nothing. Anyway, it's not an agent of action. It's the essence of who you are. It is not. It didn't decide to come here. And now we get into Shankara's adjective. Nirvikara. Atma is the unchanging observer. Nirvikara literally means unchanging, immutable. That which doesn't change. Atma is the unchanging observer of the changing conditions of your mind. And now we need to understand a very important principle, and that is we get confused about this very easily. Because conventional wisdom, if I say, did you decide to come here for a class? Yes, I decided to come here for a class. Which I? I did. Now here we have to define, what do you mean by I? By I, do you mean the essence of who you are? Yes, the essence of who you are came here. This is the normal confusion. Conventional thinking fails to distinguish between the true self, consciousness, the observer, and that which is observed, including your mind and senses. Was I going to discuss that here or later? I think it's going to come. It was going to come later, but we'll take it here. When two things, I need to. When two things are very close together in a distance, it's hard to discern the difference between them. Imagine two trees standing next to each other half a mile away. Maybe you can't distinguish the difference between them because they are so close together. Things that are close together are hard to distinguish. Here's a funny way of putting it. What is the distance between consciousness and your mind? There's no distance. They're absolutely interweaved. They pervade each other. Mind is in consciousness. Consciousness pervades the mind. You can't distinguish them. And what that results in is our common confusion of being unable to discern the difference between the consciousness that reveals our thoughts and the thoughts which are revealed. We get them confused because they're so close together. And that leads, this is really the root problem. Not the root problem is ignorance. The second problem, the problem that results, if the root problem is ignorance, the sprout from that root is what we're talking about it. And the technical word for this is superimposition, in Sanskrit, adhyasa. Superimposition, adhyasa. Because we can't discern the difference between mind and consciousness, we superimpose mind on consciousness and we superimpose consciousness on mind. Now, what that means is your mind is the agent of action. The agent of action dwells in your mind, so to speak. But that sense of agency gets attributed to your true self, consciousness. In the same way, your true self, consciousness, gets attributed to your mind, your body. So when you say, this is me, when I say this is me, aren't I attributing I-ness to this physical thing? Which is absolutely wrong. But this is the kind of confusion that takes place. It's called mutual superimposition. For our Sanskrit students, anyonya adhyasa. Anyonya, mutual. Anyonya adhyasa means the qualities of your body and mind are superimposed on the true you, atma, and your sense of I-ness, your I-ness, not sense of I-ness, your I-ness, your selfhood, is superimposed on your body and mind. This is a little abstract, so let me give you the most common metaphor. This is used all the time in Advaita Vedanta. You've probably seen this orange crystal before, and let me precede this with an explanation of superimposition. When you feel sad, the fact of the matter is sadness is present in your mind, and you are aware of the sense of sadness in your mind. So you are the conscious observer, aware of the presence of sadness in your mind. Subject, object. You are the knowing subject, the awareful observer, sakshi. You are aware of the sadness which is in your mind. The sadness is an object known by you. So when you feel sad, if I were to ask you, are you okay? Would you say, I'm okay, except there's sadness in my mind? Will you say that? I wish you would. I really, really wish you would. Because that transforms sadness completely. When you can say sadness is a passing vritti in my mind, like a cloud, a dark cloud passes over the sun. Everything gets all dark and gloomy. But you know it's just a passing cloud. You know the sun goes on shining. You know that when you discern the difference between the gloominess and a cloud and the sun. In the same way, when you can discern the difference between you, the conscious observer, Sakshi, and the mind with its sadness, when you can discern the difference, sadness is no more a problem. Sadness becomes a fact, not a problem. Usually sadness is a problem. And we feel, oh, I won't be okay until this sadness goes away. Good luck. You get rid of sadness for a while, but before long, something else happens and more sadness comes. The solution is not in getting rid of, it's like trying to get rid of all the clouds that might cover the sun. Come on. The sun always shines, and the sun isn't affected by the clouds. You see the metaphor? Consciousness always shines, so to speak, illumining the activities of your mind, and that just like the sun isn't affected by the cloud, the sun doesn't get dim when the cloud is in front. In the same way, your consciousness is utterly unaffected by the sadness in your mind, utterly unaffected. But then the question comes in, why do we feel sad? The bottom line is lack of discernment, so that's what this crystal is about. Okay. Is this crystal really orange? It sure looks orange, but you know better. You know that it's a clear crystal. You know that the crystal remains perfectly clear in spite of the appearance of orangeness, correct? You know. Do you experience a clear crystal, or do you experience an orange crystal? You experience an orange crystal. But you know. Notice I'm making a distinction here between knowledge and experience. You experience a orange crystal. You know the crystal is utterly unaffected by the orangeness. Notice, to relate to our earlier discussion, notice that this crystal appears orange when it's close to the orange fabric. We said before, with the two trees, you can't discern consciousness and mind being that closeness. So wherever there's proximity, there's confusion. So there's confusion as to the nature of this crystal. You have to remove the confusion through knowledge, not through experience. Because sadness is going to be present in your mind again and again. You can't control the experience. You can gain knowledge. Knowledge here, in this case, knowledge that the crystal remains utterly unaffected by the orangeness of the cloth. And here, your consciousness remains utterly unaffected by the sadness of your mind. I'll say that again, this is crucial. Just like this crystal remains utterly unaffected by the orangeness of this cloth, in the same way, your consciousness remains utterly unaffected by the sadness in your mind. It's a matter of appearance, and as you know, appearances can be deceiving. That's what we're talking about. The orange crystal is deceptive. Feeling sad is deceptive. We have to properly understand these experiences. You can properly understand the experience of the orange crystal. You can properly understand the experience of sadness. And when you properly understand, you know that consciousness is utterly unaffected by the presence of sadness in your mind. Okay, all of this is just to bring home this really central point, and that is, Shankara uses a term here, nirvikara atma. Atma is unchanging consciousness. This crystal doesn't become orange and then become white. This crystal is unchanging, clear. Experience changes, its appearance changes, but the crystal is unchanging. In the same way, your consciousness is nirvikara, unchanging. And in the context of this verse, Shankara's point is that which doesn't change can't do anything. And that's his main point here. Unchanging consciousness can't do anything. That's why knowledge that of your unchanging consciousness on one hand, and action, especially doing rituals, are incompatible. This is a point of this verse. And we'll finish up the verse and we'll go on to the next one. And so Shankara's point here is that the knowledge we're seeking is knowledge that Atma doesn't do anything. Tell me, how can action, to do action, you have to be identified with the body and mind. You have to be in a state of ignorance, identified with the body and mind. In that state of ignorance, you can do any action, including all these rituals. Atma is not an agent of action. The knowledge we seek is knowledge of the absence of agency. Let me try. I'm not being clear enough. I don't like that. Let's do this. To be an agent of action, Shankara says, requires abhimana, identification with the body and mind. To be an agent of action requires ignorance. I'll make it very simple. To be an agent of action, to do rituals, requires ignorance of your true nature as a non-agent. So, karma is based on ignorance. Knowledge is the opposite of ignorance. How compatible are knowledge and ignorance? That's his argument. Knowledge and ignorance are absolutely incompatible. Knowledge that Atma is a non-agent of action is absolutely incompatible with the ignorance of committing actions. The ignorance-based identification with the body and mind which is required to do actions. I know it's a little abstract, but Shankara deals with these abstractions. So basically, the incompatibility here is that karma is based on ignorance, and that ignorance is incompatible with knowledge. That's his central point, and he's going to develop that now in the next verse. In fact, first half continues what we've just been saying. Aham karta mamedam syat, aham karta mamedam syat, iti karma pravartate, iti karma pravartate, vastvadhina bhaved vidya, vastvadhina bhaved vidya, I'm just looking at the grammar. Sorry, I can read it fine. So kartra adhina becomes karta adhina. I have to get the sandhi right in my head. Karta adhina bhaved vidihi. Karta adhina. I'm sorry. Karta kartra. Kartra. There's a typo here. It has to be karta-dino. Karta-adina. That's why I'm stuck here. It's not karta-dina, it's karta-dina. You can make that correction. Karta is agent of action. And we'll see the meaning of that expression in just a moment. And it didn't look right. Okay, back up to the first half of the verse. He's saying, in the second line, karma paravartate. Karma, one engages in action. Karma paravartate, one engages in various actions, including rituals. Iti, with a certain mindset. What is a mindset? Aham karta. I am the agent of action. Mama idam syat. And idam, this result of the action, is mama, for me. So I am the agent of action, and I get the result. I am the possessor of the result. That's conventional thinking. Like, I came to class this evening, as we discussed before. And now the next time somebody asks you, what did you do last night? You're going to be silly. If you really want to answer Vedantically, what did you do Tuesday night? Kuch nahi. Nothing. I thought you went to class. He says, well, my body and mind went to class, but the pure consciousness, which is my essential nature, did nothing at all. That's the correct answer. Of course, no one will understand you, but that truly is the correct answer. But here Shankara, in the first half of the verse, illustrates the conventional worldview, which is confused. Just like one who thinks that this is an orange crystal, in the same way, one thinks, aham karta. I, meaning consciousness, I am an agent of action. Mama idam palam syat. And the result of the action comes to me. I get the result of the action. That's like saying this truly is an orange crystal. That is confusion. That is error. Or to go back to our fancy word, that is adhyasa, superimposition. Just as orangeness is superimposed on the crystal, in the same way, doership is superimposed on consciousness. You get that? Okay, that's the first half of the verse. So this is the confusion, and this is finishing up his prior statement. His prior statement is that knowledge and karma are incompatible. Here he shows how to be an agent of action is based on ignorance, and ignorance is incompatible with knowledge. Now, in the second half, he gives another argument, which is a little... These great teachers like Shankara were just brilliant scholars. And sometimes they use some sophisticated, not sometimes, they frequently use sophisticated ideas in examining a topic. And here's a fairly sophisticated idea in the second half. It's another way of showing the incompatibility of knowledge and karma. Karma based on ignorance is incompatible with knowledge, that Atma is not an agent of action. So here he gives another reason for this incompatibility. He says in the third line, Vidya, knowledge, bhavet, happens to be, vastu adhina, is a technical expression. Knowledge depends on the object known. Vastu here means thing. Vastu adhina, dependent on the object. Knowledge, I'll give you the verse and then I'll explain. Knowledge depends on the object, but karma adhina, it has to be karma adhina. Karma adhina bhaved vidhi. But vidhi, what was vidhi? Vidhi, go back to the board. I just want to remind you what vidhi is. Where is the board? Here. See that number 2, vihita, enjoined, and enjoined rituals, and enjoined rituals are called also vidhi. So vidhi, not exactly a synonym, but it's related to this second item on the board. So vidhi, which is enjoined rituals, bhavet, happen to be karta adhina, dependent on the agent. So we're getting Shankara's sophisticated thinking. So he says, to paraphrase, knowledge depends on the object known. Ritual actions depend on the doer of the actions. Now that's extremely abstract, so let me give you examples. Second one, actions, vidhi means the performance of rituals in this context, and the performance of any action. Shankara says it depends on the agent of action, and the way it's explained in almost all commentaries, if you're going to do something, you can do it like this, or you can not do it, or you can do it in some other way. So suppose you're cooking. You're going to make chapatis. I don't know why, but you're going to make chapati. So then you can either make chapati, whatever you do, put it on that tava, or you can not make a chapati, or you can make it differently. Do what I do. You buy one, put it in the microwave. Actually, I don't even buy. We have wonderful volunteers here who bring the food. So I take the chapati from the refrigerator, put it in the microwave. So in other words, you can do something, you can not do something, or you can do something in a different way. You have choice. When it comes to action, you have choice. As a minimum, you have these 3 choices. With knowledge, do you have any choice? 2 plus 2 equals, do you have any choice? You have no choice at all. That's what Shankara is pointing out here. Knowledge is vastu adhina. Knowledge depends on the object. 2 plus 2 is not subject to interpretation. You don't get any choice. As opposed to making chapatis, you have choice. In any action, you have choice. In doing any rituals, you have choice. So in the second half, Shankara points out another kind of incompatibility between knowledge and action. And what Shankara is doing here is negating this jnana karma samuchaya, this opposing point of view that says knowledge must be accompanied by action, in particular rituals, for that knowledge to be effective. And Shankara says, no way, knowledge and karma are incompatible. Now he takes it another level. And this is a nice discussion we'll get into here. Yes. Yeah, good. Karakan yupamridnati, Karakan yupamridnati, Vidya buddhimivo share, Vidya buddhimivo share, iti tat satyamadaya, iti tat satyamadaya, karma kartum vyavasyati, karma kartum vyavasyati. And in the second line in the Roman transliteration, there's an error. Vidya should be an apostrophe and then double B, because the word is Vidya Buddhi. Buddhi means up. Up means apaha. Apaha means water. We'll see the meaning in just a minute, but that's a type of the Devanagari is fine. The transliteration is wrong. So he says, Vidya, knowledge, the knowledge of Atma, atma-vichara, atma-bodha, that knowledge, first line end, upamrudnati, removes, destroys. Destroys what? Karakani. Karaka are factors involved in action. Factors involved in action, we just talked about one. You get choice. You can choose to do something, you can choose not to do something, you can choose to do it in different ways. Also, there is an agent involved in any action. There are instruments involved in every action. There is a result of every action. So karaka is a general term for all of the factors involved in action. And Shankara says here that vidya, knowledge of your true nature as unchanging consciousness, that knowledge upamrudnati, removes karakani, everything associated with action. Because you recognize I am unchanging consciousness. In the presence of unchanging consciousness, all this stuff takes place in the in the presence of me, unchanging consciousness, teaching takes place, thinking takes place, speaking takes place, waving my hands around takes place. All these activities take place in the presence of unchanging consciousness. But now we're back to our problem of it feels like I'm talking. It feels like I'm thinking. It seems like I'm waving my hand around. Well, those experiences, as we said before, are deceptive. We get confused, just as we get confused about the crystal remaining absolutely clear in spite of the presence of orangeness. In the same way, consciousness, the essence of who I am, remains absolutely unchanging in spite of all the thinking going on, in spite of all the talking going on. And Shankara gives a famous metaphor here. Sometimes he gives a crystal metaphor. Here he gives a different metaphor, but it works quite nicely. He says, buddhim eva ushare. He says, ushara is desert. Ushare, in the desert. In the desert, you can imagine if the sun is shining down, you look at the horizon and you see the mirage of water. And you know that that mirage water appears because the air gets this ripply effect due to the heat. So due to the heat in the desert, you get that ripply effect. That ripply effect in the air makes you think that there is water. Buddhi is up. Buddhi is the conclusion that it's water. So the metaphor, Eva, the word Eva is hidden there. Eva, just like Ushare, in the desert, there is Buddhi, there is a conclusion that there is water. To conclude that there is water in the desert it's an appearance, and you're confused about it. Appearances can be deceptive. The appearance of water in the desert is an illusion there's no water. And here's an interesting comment, an interesting point, and that is, when you see the ripples, suppose I'm standing with you, you say, oh, look at the water in the distance. I tell you, it's not water, it's an optical illusion due to the refraction of light in the air and makes it ripply, etc., etc. And with that you get, oh, there's no water. Watch this. After you know there's no water, do the ripples go away? The ripples continue. It looks exactly the same. The difference is you don't take the ripples to indicate water. The ripples are just ripples, not water. You understand correctly. Just like our earlier metaphor, when you understand it's a clear crystal, you don't take the orangeness seriously. You know it's a mere appearance. In the same way, in the desert, you know it's a mere appearance. You don't take the ripples to mean water. And in the same way, you don't take the sense of agency too seriously. You experience yourself as an agent of action. You felt like you were coming here to class tonight. You didn't feel, honestly, you did not feel like you were the conscious observer of your mind making a decision, your body getting into a car, and the car transferring your body and mind to the ashram. That's not what you felt. You felt like you were coming to the ashram. Here's my point. A feeling is an experience, like the experience of water in a desert, like the experience of orangeness in the crystal. And the point here is experiences have to be properly interpreted. I'm going to say that again. Experiences have to be properly interpreted. How many times have you heard me talk about the sunset? You experience the sun going down. The sun isn't going down. The earth is turning. So that's an experience that you have to properly interpret. You experience an orange crystal. Fine, but it's not orange. This experience has to be properly interpreted. When you see the mirage water, fine, you see the ripples. That experience has to be properly interpreted. In the same way, your experience of being a human being has to be properly interpreted. That's Vedanta, is to properly interpret our ordinary experiences to discover an extraordinary truth hidden by ignorance. That sounded good. I want to say that again. Vedanta leads us to examine our ordinary experiences to discover an extraordinary truth hidden by ignorance. Well said. I've never put it in quite those terms. It's nice, and it's quite accurate. And what that means is, what we seek, unchanging consciousness, the true self, the inner divinity, it's hidden in plain sight, obscured only by ignorance. If you want a clear crystal, what separates you from the clear crystal is only ignorance. Right? It is a clear crystal. If you think it's orange, the orangeness is a product of ignorance. If you want to be full, complete, absolutely content, my guru's words were perfect. You already are what you want to become. You already possess what you want to gain. Let's finish this verse. Iti tat satyam adaya karma kartum vyevasyati. So having gained this knowledge, then iti thus, and we have to supply the question how tat satyam adaya. How can you then take these, that tat refers to the karaka in the first line. If you're enlightened, how can you take the sense of agency as being true? To take the sense of agency as being true and karma kartum vyavasyati, and to vyavasyati, to strive, to be engaged, karma kartum, in doing action. In order to act, you have to be identified with your body and mind. In order to be identified with your body and mind, you have to be ignorant of the fact that your true nature is unchanging consciousness that doesn't do anything at all. I'm just going to flip this upside down to make a related point. Shankara's point here is again to show the absolute incompatibility of knowledge of your true nature as not an agent of action compared to any kind of action which is based on ignorance. So action based on ignorance is absolutely incompatible with knowledge of your true nature as a non-agent of action. I'm going to flip this upside down and take one last point for tonight, and that is, and this is very pertinent to Shankara's argument, and that is to persist in identifying yourself. I'm just kind of flipping the meaning of the last half around. To persist in identifying with your body and mind, and to persist in engaging in action, that perpetuates ignorance. You're holding on to ignorance. So remember, the argument Shankara is addressing here is you have to do these rituals in order to get enlightened. This knowledge will not work unless you do these rituals. In fact, rituals he's talking about is not puja, which is often waving an arati lamp, but rituals in Shankara's time was some kind of homa, havan, yajna, making offerings into a sacred fire. So let me show it properly. To do a ritual, like offering into a sacred fire, to do that, I am perpetuating my identification with this body and mind, and in doing so, I'm holding on to ignorance. How will that help me gain knowledge? Holding on to ignorance is incompatible with gaining knowledge. And that ultimately is Shankaracharya's point here, and in this way he's just defeating this idea of jnana karma samuchaya, this idea that you have to perform any kind of action. In particular, you have to perform these rituals in order to gain enlightenment. Shankara, actually, one more verse. We'll save that for tomorrow. Next week, I should say. We'll continue and we'll see more. Shankara continues to refute this jnana karma samuchaya. We'll see that next week. And we'll conclude with our prayers. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha Sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.